Okay, before we start the quadratic formula and the discriminant, let's talk about all the methods that we've learned for solving quadratic functions. There are actually 4 instead of 3. The first method we learned was, and we're going to put n graphing. We learned how to make a table of values. And remember that when you're making a table of values, you have to find the vertex first. Once we graphed with the table of values, the second thing we used was factoring or zero product property to find the roots, and then we did the vertex formula to find the vertex. Then the previous lesson we just learned was completing the square. And the great thing about completing the square was that you could pull the vertex out. So you did not have to do negative b over 2a. You could just pull the vertex out of the equation. Yay! And today we will be learning the fourth method for solving so that we can graph them, and that's called the quadratic formula. Now, the benefit of the quadratic formula is that it works every time. However, there are lots of places where you can make a mistake in the quadratic formula, and it takes time to do as well. So it's kind of our last resort if we can't do anything else, because it does work every time, but it is not the most fun one to do, let's put it that way. So here's the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Keep in mind that we're still dealing with the same a's, b's, and c's. So once you get it equal to 0, a is the number in front of the square term, b is the number in front of the x, and c is the constant. Now there are a couple ways that you can remember the quadratic formula. I'll sing them for you. There's one, a song, and a story. So the song goes like this, to Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And notice the whole thing is over 2a, not just the right side, but the whole thing. There's also a little story that I learned one time, and it goes like this. There was a negative boy who could not decide yes or no if he should go to a radical party. But the boy was a square, and he missed out on 4 awesome chicks, and the whole party was over at 2 a.m. So this is something that you will have to memorize for the unit test. And if the song works or the story works, whatever works for you, you need to make sure that you memorize this. So let's work through this. Again, remember, we're just solving for x like we have in all the other methods. It's just a formula that we use instead of working through the equation to solve. So the first thing you always want to make sure of is that you have it equal to 0. And this one is already equal to 0. And it might be good as you're starting out to identify what a, b, and c are. So a is always the number in front of the squared term, so in this case it's 1. B is the number in front of the x term, so it is 10. And c is always the constant, negative 24. If it's not equal to 0, then you need to get it equal to 0 first before you can identify your a, b, and c. Once you've identified them, now we're going to plug them into the formula. X equals negative b, and if b is 10, then negative b is negative 10, plus or minus the square root b squared, okay, b squared, so 10 squared is 100, minus 4 ac. I always multiply the awesome chicks together. So I always square the b in the first step here, and I always multiply the a and the c together. 1 times negative 24 will give me negative 24. All over 2a, so 2 times 1 gives me 2. One of the things you should notice is that if you look closely, we've got actually our vertex right there, negative b over 2a. So that is half of the quadratic formula, a formula that we already know. And then I'll talk about this other half in a bit. So I would certainly do some steps, square this number, multiply a and c together, multiply 2 and a together in the first step. One less thing that you have to do. Now you have to be careful that you follow the order of operations. So we do not subtract here first. We multiply these two together. And I would always look at these numbers as -4 times -24. So everything else will continue to come down. -10 plus or minus the square root of 100 all over 2. And then do -4 times -24, which gives us +96. Now, this will give us 196 when we add this together. So we'll just do that, 196. Everything else will stay the same, -10 plus or minus all over 2. And we can go ahead and take the square root of 19.6, which is a whole number, 14. So we're taking the square root of 196 to get 14. So what in the world does this plus or minus sign mean? Remember, in most cases, a parabola will cross the x-axis in 2 places. So we're looking for 2 solutions, and here's where we get our 2 solutions. One solution will go -10 plus 14 over 2. And the other one will give us -10 minus 14 over 2. And now we just complete those. So -10 plus 14 would be +4. And 4 divided by 2 will give us 2. Here, -10 minus 14 would give us -24 over 2, which gives us -12. And then we can set up our set notation. I'm sorry, we're running a little small on space here. So we get x such that x equals 2 and -12. So that is your quadratic formula. You go through the steps every time. You can see if this were easily factored, it would be much easier to factor it. So this will be our last option that we resort to if we can't do anything else. Let's try another one here. Now this one is not equal to 0, so we need to get it equal to 0 first by subtracting 17. Identify your A, your B, and your C. And now we can start plugging this in. I'll write a little smaller. X equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac. 4 times a, or -17 is -68. All over 2a, oops, and 2 times 4 will actually give us 8. So, b squared, 2 squared is 4. A times c is -68, and 2 times a, which is 4, is 8. When we multiply these two together, this time a -4 times a -68 gives us 276, positive. The rest stays the same. I'm going to skip a step here. When I take, oops, I already did skip a step. This plus 4 gives us 276. So this must have been 272. And then we added 4 to get 276. So if you would like to do that, skip the step, that's okay. That saved us a little room here. The square root of 276 then comes out to be a decimal, 16.61. So we get -2 plus or minus 16.61 over 8. And now we split this into 2 answers. You can go off the side, you can go down below. I'm going to go down below this time. So -2 plus 16.61 over 8 gives us 1.8. And -2 minus 16.61 over 8 gives us -2.3. And then you can put your set notation there. Now, when you take the square root, you should go to hundredths place. because when we add it and then divide by 8, if we only go to tens place, it could give us a different decimal here. We want to be as accurate as possible. So go to hundredths place, not tens, but hundredths, 2 places to get that. Okay? We'll do one more quadratic formula, and then I'll show you what the discriminant is. Now, in number 3, we have to get this equal to 0 first, so we add 19. 2x squared minus 9x plus 12 equals 0. A is 2, B is negative 9, and C is 12. We start our formula over here. X equals negative B. Now the negative of negative 9 is going to be positive 9. Plus or minus the square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So let's go back. Remember, anything you square is always going to be positive. So when I square negative 9, I get positive 81. Minus 4, and then A times C, 2 times 12, will give us 24. And then again, at the beginning, negative B, or the opposite of B. So if B is already negative, you have to change it to positive. All over 2 times A is 2, so 2 times 2 gives us 4. This one is a little different, because what happens when we multiply negative 4 times 24, we get negative 96. So this is what we end up with. 9 plus or minus the square root of negative 96, 81 minus 96 over 4. And 81 minus 96, when we do that step, gives us negative 15. Now try putting that in your calculator, the square root of negative 15. If you put that in your calculator, it's going to say error, because we can't take the square root of the negative, which means the answer is no solution. And what's really going on here, if there's no solution, is that the parabola never crosses the x-axis. So you can say no solution, or you can say the empty set. So those, we can get a positive in there that will give us 2 answers, or if we get a negative in there, it will give us no answers, which leads us to the last thing here that we're going to talk about, the discriminant. Now the discriminant is only a portion of the quadratic formula, but the discriminant helps us determine how many real roots an equation has. So it basically will tell us if the parabola crosses the x-axis in 1 place, 2 places, or 0 places. So let me show you what I mean. So in the quadratic formula, we have the big radical that is b squared minus 4ac, the radical party. Now the discriminant is only what's inside the radical, so b squared minus 4ac. Now there are 3 possibilities. When you plug in these values, you could get something that is either less than 0, so you get a negative number. You could get something that is equal to 0, or you could get something that is greater than 0, or it will give you a positive number. Okay? Now let's go back to the problem we just did. If we look at the b squared minus 4ac in this problem, we got 81 minus 96, which gave us negative 15. And we could not take the square root of it, so we got no solutions, does not cross the x-axis. That's what's going on here. When I plug that value in, I'd get negative 15, that's less than 0. I can't take the square root. So it gives us no solutions or no real roots. So the picture is exactly what I just drew above there. It just won't cross the x-axis. Okay. Now these other examples that we had, we'll look at this one. We got radical 196, which was a positive number. When you take the square root of a positive number, then you get to add it to that number and divide by 2, subtract it from that number and divide by 2, so we'll get 2 answers. The same thing happened here. We got the square root of 276, which was a positive number, and it gave us 2 answers. So down here, If the value of the discriminant is greater than 0 or positive, it gives us 2 real roots, which means the parabola will cross the x-axis in 2 places. 1, 2. Now the last scenario, if you get exactly 0 inside the radical, and we take the square root of 0, there's no positive 0 and negative 0. There's just 0. So instead of it splitting into 2 answers, up a little further. So let's say this was 0 right here. Negative 10 plus 0 divided by 2, negative 10 minus 0 divided by 2. It would still be negative 10 divided by 2, negative 10 divided by 2, which will give us the same single answer. So if the value of your discriminant is equal to 0, that means we only get 1 real root, because whether you add 0 or subtract 0 is still the same number. And in that case, that means the parabola is just touching the x-axis in one place, so we only get 1 real root. So let's put this into action and see what happens. There's only 2 examples here. So this one is equal to 0 already. We know A is 5, B is negative 6, and C is 3. So all we're doing is plugging into B squared minus 4AC. B squared, remember, is going to be positive 36. No matter what you square, you always get a positive number. Minus 4, and then multiply the awesome chicks together, 5 times 3, which is 15. Order of operations says we multiply here first, so we get negative 60. And 36 minus 60 would give me negative 24. Now remember, we would have then taken the square root of that, which we cannot do, which will give us no solutions or no real roots. 5, however, needs to get equal to 0 first. So we subtract 5. We get 2x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0. Now A is 2, B is 6, and C is negative 5. If you identify A, B, and C here, you'll get positive 5. It will change your answer. So be very careful that you always get it equal to 0 first. Now B squared is 36 again, minus 4, and multiply the awesome chicks together. 2 times negative 5 will give us negative 10. Negative 4 times negative 10 gives us positive 40. And so we get 36 plus 40, which is 76. And then if we were doing a full quadratic formula, we'd take the square root of that, which would give us a positive and a negative, 2 answers. So if this answer is positive, it gives us 2 real roots. If this answer is negative, we get no real roots. If the answer is 0, we get 1 real root. The biggest thing with quadratic formula is that you watch your signs. It's always a sign issue with quadratic formula. And just take your time and go slowly so you don't make a mistake. There are lots of places where you can make a mistake. You want to be careful that you take your time.